I opened the front door, and immediately felt cool drizzle on my face. It mingled with the sweat, diluting the pain in my arm, diluting everything, and I closed my eyes and let it fall. It was one of the nicest things I've experienced. You may say that it's a pretty poor life I've been leading, but, then, you see, context is everything. I left the front door on the latch, stepped down onto the pavement and lit a cigarette. Gradually, grumpily, my heart sorted itself out, and my breathing followed at a distance. The pain in my arm was terrible, and I knew it would be with me for days, if not weeks. But at least it wasn't my smoking arm. I went back into the house and saw that Rainer was where I'd left him, lying in a pool of vomit. He was dead, or he was grievously bodily harmed, either of which meant at least 5 years, 10 with time added on for bad behavior. And this, from my point of view, was bad. I've been in prison, you see, only for 3 weeks, and only on remand. But when you've had to play chess twice a day with a monosyllabic West Ham supporter who has hate tattooed on one hand and hate on the other, using a set of missing 6 pawns, all the rooks, and 2 of the bishops, you find yourself cherishing the little things in life, like not being in prison. I was contemplating these and related matters, and started to think of all the hot countries I've never gotten around to visiting, when I realized that noise, that soft, creaking, shuffling, scraping noise, was definitely not coming from my heart, nor from my lungs, nor from any other part of my yelping body. That noise was definitely external. Someone, or something, was making an utterly hopeless job of coming down the stairs quietly. I left the Buddha where it was, picked up a hideous alabaster table lighter, and moved towards the door, which was also hideous. How can one make a hideous door? You may ask. Well, it takes some doing, certainly, but believe me, the top interior designers can knock off this kind of thing before breakfast. I tried to hold my breath, and I couldn't, so I waited noisily. A light switch flicked on somewhere, waited, then flicked off. A door opened. Pause. Nothing there either. Closed. Stand still. Think. Try the sitting room. There was a rustle of clothing, a soft football, and then suddenly I found I was relaxing my grip on the alabaster lighter, and leaning back against the wall in something close to relief. Because even if my frightened, wounded state, I was ready to stake my life on the fact that Nina Ricci's Fleur de Fleurs is not just a fighting scent. She stopped in the doorway and looked around the room. The lights were out, but the curtains were wide open, and there was plenty of light coming in from the street. I waited until her gaze fell on Rainer's body before I put my hand over her mouth. We went through all the usual exchanges dictated by Hollywood and polite society. She tried to scream and bite the palm of my hand, but I told her to be quiet, and I wasn't going to hurt her unless she shouted. She shouted, and I heard her. Pretty standard stuff, really. By and by, she was sitting on the hideous sofa with half a pint of what I thought was brandy, but turned out to be Calvados, and I was standing by the door wearing my smartest and best "I am psychiatrically A1" expression. I'd rolled Rainer onto his side, into a kind of recovery position, to stop him from choking on his own vomit, or anyone else's if it came to that. She'd wanted to get up and fiddle with him to see if he was all right. Pillows, damp cloths, bandages, all the things had helped to make the bystander feel better. But I told her to stay where she was, because I'd already called an ambulance, and all in all, it would be better to leave him alone. She started to tremble slightly. It started in her hands as they clutched the glass, then moved to her elbows and up to her shoulders, and it got worse every time she looked at Rainer. Of course, trembling is probably not an uncommon reaction to discovering a mixture of dead person and vomit on your carpet in the middle of the night, but I didn't want her getting any worse. As I lit a cigarette with the alabaster lighter, and yes, even the flame was hideous, I tried to take in as much information as I could before the Calvados booted her up and she started asking questions. I could see her face 3 times in that room. Once in a silver-framed photograph on the mantelpiece, with her in Ray-Bans, dangling from the ski lift, once in a huge and terrible oil portrait, done by someone who can't have liked her all that much, hanging by the window, and finally, and definitely the best of all, in a sofa, 10 feet away. She couldn't have been more than 19, with square shoulders and long brown hair that waved and cheered as it disappeared behind her neck. The high, round cheekbones implied orientalness, but that disappeared as soon as you reached her eyes, which were also round and large and bright grey, if that makes any sense. She was wearing a red silk dressing gown and one elegant slipper with a fancy gold thread across the toes. I glanced round the room, but its mate was nowhere to be seen. Maybe she could only fold one. She cleared some husk from her throat. "Who is he?" she said. I think I'd know she was going to be American before she opened her mouth. Too healthy to be anything else. "And where did they get those teeth?" "His name was Rayner," I said, and then realized that this sounded a little thin as an answer, so I thought I'd add something. "He was a very dangerous man." "Dangerous?" She looked worried by that, and quite right too. It was probably crossing her mind, as it was crossing mine, that if Rayner was dangerous, and I'd killed him, then that, hierarchically speaking, made me very dangerous. "Dangerous," I said again, and watched her closely as she looked away. She seemed to be trembling less, which was good, or maybe her trembling had just fallen into sync with mine, so I noticed it less. "Well, what is he doing here?" she said at last. "What did he want?" "It's difficult to say. Difficult for me, at any rate. Maybe he was after money, maybe the silver." "You mean he didn't tell you?" Her voice was suddenly loud. "You hit this guy without knowing who he was? What he was doing here?" Despite the shock, her brain seemed to be coming along pretty nicely. "I hit him because he was trying to kill me," I said. "I'm like that." I tried a roguish smile, then caught sight of it in the mirror over the mantelpiece, and realized it hadn't worked. "You're like that," she repeated, unlovingly. "And who are you?" Well now, I was going to have to wear some very soft shoes at this juncture. This is where things could suddenly get a lot worse than they already were. I tried to look surprised and perhaps just a little bit hurt. "You mean you don't recognize me?" "No." "Huh. Odd. Fincham. James Fincham." I held out my hand. She didn't take it, so I converted the movement into a nonchalant brush of the hair. "That's a name," she said. "That's not who you are." "I'm a friend of your father's." She considered this for a moment. "Business friend?" "Sort of." "Sort of." She nodded. "You're James Fincham. You're sort of a business friend of my father's, and you've just killed a man in our house." I put my head on one side and tried to show that yes, sometimes it is an absolute bugger of a world. She showed her teeth again. "And that's it, is it? That's your CV?" I reprised the roguish smile to no better effect. "Wait a second," she said. She looked at Rayner, then suddenly sat up a little straighter, as if a thought had just struck her. "You didn't call anybody, did you?" Come to think of it, all things considered, she must have been nearly 24. "You mean—" I was floundering now. "I mean," she said, "there's no ambulance coming here." Jesus! She put the glass down on the carpet by her feet, got up, and walked towards the phone.